Hi everyone, welcome. I hope you've all been having a wonderful conference. Some of you look a little more engaged. Feel free to come up closer to the front so I can actually see you. It is a pretty small crowd, so I would hate to miss anyone's questions or just anyone's beautiful face. So please feel free to come up a little bit further. And I know I'm making you move, but it's good to walk as a developer. That's what I've learned. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for moving up front. And I promise, I don't yell. I don't scream. It'll all be good. So yeah, welcome to CKEditor's talk on everything as a plugin. Here I'm going to briefly try to describe what the architecture of CKEditor looks like, especially when you're trying to build a plugin onto the platform. So, who am I? Who's this random girl talking about CKEditor? Well, I'm Sugosh. I'm a developer relations manager at CKEditor. I actually started off my career as a full-stack developer, and now I'm into Devworld. I've worked a little bit with product teams in the past, as well as marketing. That's where Devworld usually sits. Currently, I work for our holding company, Tayugo Technologies, and they build tools that are used by over 2 million developers, which is a really cool fun fact. And then in my career, I actually started off as a full-stack developer at IBM Cloud, and then I moved on to DigitalOcean, where I worked on global developer ecosystem partnerships, as well as developer relations program management. And then now I am here at Tayugo working with CKEditor, and it's a lot of fun. So the fun fact about me, because I feel like in these slides everyone needs a fun fact, is that I've traveled to over 30 plus countries. And no, it's not part of my job, it's just out of personal fun thing because I love to travel, which works great for this type of job, by the way. So what is CKEditor? How many of you are aware of what CKEditor is? Oh, nice. So everyone who's familiar with CKEditor came to this talk. If you're not familiar, if you've ever used a kind of document collaboration platform, an LMS, a CMS, like Drupal, the rich text editor that you see where you type in your text is CKEditor. In LMS platforms, you might have actually seen this sort of collaboration functionality. That's also a CKEditor. We're actually very much known for our collaboration features. So it's basically a rich text editor component that lets you edit and format text using like the what you see, what you get editing area. So that's essentially what CKEditor is. Since most of you know what it is, I'm not going to continue kind of delving on the slide. Let's move on to the next one. So we're here to talk about plugins, right? Everything is a plugin. So CKEditor actually just operates on I call it a plugin-based architecture where even like core features like typing and paragraph handling are implemented as plugins. So it's a very granular approach for plugin implementation, and it allows for significant customization and flexibility. The way I'm gonna like to think about it is if you've ever stopped by our booth, we're actually raffling away this Lego set. But think of it as a huge customizable Lego set for building websites or web components, and where you can type and edit like stories or messages. And this Lego set is special, or CKEditor is special, because it comes with tiny blocks called plugins that let you basically add cool features to your existing editor. So I would just think of plugins as different Lego pieces that can do different things. And yes, you can follow the standard plugin and get exactly what you want out of the Lego set, or you can customize it and make it cool and make it your own. So this is also a pitch for a raffle. Come check it out. If you are there at 3 p.m., you can actually have a chance to win our Lego raffle as well. So if you've not stopped by our booth at D1, definitely check it out. But let me talk a little bit more about CKEditor. So to effectively use CKEditor's plugin and understand the architecture and the plugin system and data flow is pretty essential, right? So I already have mentioned like a lot of times that it's a plugin-based architecture. But what I want to mention is that there's kind of 3 parts to this. There's the user interface layer. the API and plugin layer, and then there's the editing abstraction. So the user interface, the UI library, basically manages the user interface components, such as the buttons, drop-downs, panels, if you have some. The API and the plugin is where the plugin layer sort of sits, and it kind of extends the editor's capabilities, right? You can interact with the editor's content, add UI elements to it, and listen or dispatch events to the editor. And finally, we have the editing abstraction. So that sort of handles the editing engine document model and operations on the document itself. So here, extending CKEditor to implement custom functionality, like maybe you want to add a highlight class to a selected text, or you want to just make a simple text bold, but the bold needs to be adjusted specifically, then it really involves understanding both its architecture and knowing how to integrate new features with it. So this is a pretty modular architecture, and the key thing that you have to realize is that we're separating the concerns of content and editing from like browser inconsistencies maybe, and even UI design. So it is very separate, and this is what kind of makes it really customizable and extensible for your project. So what is a plugin? So CKEditor, the plugin can be two different things. In my opinion, kind of falls in two different categories. There's one approach where you can actually just extend the existing plugin class. So in this approach, you can create a plugin by defining a class that extends CKEditor's 5's plugin base class. This method is more structured and is recommended for especially if you're creating like complex plugins that might need to interact with other plugins or require initialization or specific destruction processes. So when extending the plugin class, your plugin can actually leverage some of the existing lifecycle methods. That's why you would extend it. And you also just get all of the properties that come with the base class. So would recommend it if you are actually just looking for a complex plugin. And then there's the approach 2, which is, just creating a plain function. A plugin can also just be a simple function that takes the editor instance as a parameter, and then you can operate on that. In this case, you do have to realize that all the lifecycle hooks that come with like initializing or destroying the plugin after execution is not included. So you'd have to sort of code that in on your own. So maybe this is more fit for some of the simpler use cases rather than some of the complex plugins. So it really depends on like what you want to do with your plugin and how you want to extend it. And you can kind of decide between these two approaches on how you would create a plugin. So the plugin implementation can be pretty straightforward, but it's important to understand that there's two aspects to it. There's a plugin editing aspect and a plugin UI aspect. Actually, in this talk, probably should have switched that around, but the UI aspect is what we'll first talk about. So this component of a plugin is actually responsible for the visual elements of the editor, such as, as I talked about in the past, the buttons, the drop-downs, the prompts that the user might interact with. It is essentially the front end of the plugin. And it integrates pretty seamlessly with CKEditor's toolbar as well and other UI components, and really provides a visual way to execute commands or modify content. And then you have the plugin's editing part. So this part actually handles the sort of behind-the-scenes operations that occur when a user like interacts with the UI, right? So it includes everything from processing text transformations, managing the editor's data model, and implementing very core functionalities that just define the behavior of that plugin. So this kind of division of the UI and the editing parts of a specific plugin actually is what truly customizes it and offers the flexibility as you like extend it across different editors or different UIs. So let's continue talking a little bit more about the architecture. And if you've noticed, this is the mascot, and I hope you're enjoying the kind of theme throughout the presentation. But before I talk about the plugin implementation, I do want to dig a little bit deeper into how it works. So in CKEditor, it actually, at the core of the architecture is the implementation of a model view controller design pattern, MVC. You can also think of it as a model view plugin architecture in a sense. And it may not strictly follow the MVC pattern from what I've noticed, as seen in like traditional software engineering projects, but I think this approach actually enables CKEditor 5 to offer a very customizable and efficient editing experience, right? So unlike the DOM that's used in web browsers, CKEditor's model is a custom tree structure data model. We'll get into that in just a little bit. And it's actually designed to represent the content of the editor in that way. So, and then the view, so I've talked about the model, and then let's get into the view. The view is essentially responsible for rendering the model to the user and handling some of the user's interactions. So here I have an example of a CKEditor screenshot that I took, and I wrote the text, this is very important. I have entered, so I have a space between the image and the text. Then I have an image. This is actually from an image from my trip to Iceland last week, unfiltered. You can watch the moon rising. It's really beautiful, so I had to include it. And then I gave the image a caption, nice view, with an exclamation. So it's pretty great. So how is this represented in the DOM? I think most of us here are pretty familiar on how this would be represented in the DOM. You have something like, this is very important. The very is in bold, so you can see that. Then, of course, you have a space between the image and the text. And then the image itself is represented as figure with a caption, nice space view. Pretty straightforward. This is the DOM representation. But how is this represented in the model? Well, in the model, if we look at it, it's, as I said, a very custom tree structure, very similar to the DOM, but it's not exactly how it's represented in the DOM, because that would add a lot of complications. And it's not, the DOM's not necessarily efficient for editing operations. So what it does is it essentially abstracts the content from its presentation, meaning the same model can be used to render different outputs. So even if you wanted to render HTML or Markdown, you can do that without having to change the underlying data, which is what makes it really efficient. And then let's talk a little bit about the tree structure of this model, right? So this model, of course, is organized as a tree. It does look a lot like the DOM initially. Even when I looked at it, it looked a little bit like the DOM. Had to really dig deep into the docs to understand the differences. But it's specifically optimized for the needs of like text editing and supporting operations like insertions, deletions, bold. So as you can see, there's an extra sort of hierarchy for bold in the DOM. Here you can sort of see it attached to the paragraph itself. And then I think ultimately this sort of model tree structure for the model enables complex features. So the abstract nature of this model really enables you to have things like tables, lists, nested blocks, as they can be represented as part of the tree without you actually having to worry about like the specifics of the HTML syntax itself. And if you've ever worked with HTML, you do know that it gets complicated. So then we have the view. So we talked about the model. How does the view look for that specific screenshot that I took? Well, in the view, it actually, think of the view as playing this sort of abstract role in, this sort of role in bridging the gap between like the data model with the user's interaction on the screen. Right? It's actually responsible for rendering the content editor in a way that is visually accessible to the users for handling user input. So if you're on the view, there are three important things to kind of understand about the view layer. What it does, it renders the model, it handles user input, and it updates the visual representation, or it updates the DOM. So those are three important things that the view does. It is really designed to be extensible, and it allows developers to actually introduce new features, custom elements, and even specialized handling of specific types of content. So that's kind of the view layer. And it really helps support like a wide range of features, I believe, in CKEditor 5 that is not only offered out of the box, but it also provides just like a great foundation to build plugins on. So the data flow, how does this all kind of work together? We saw the model, we saw the view, and we saw the DOM. How do they interact with each other? Well, everything begins with the user, right? It's a text editor, it faces a user. So when the user interacts with, I do not know what happened to my slide there. It looks fine over here, but looks crushed over there. Very interesting, fascinating. Okay, so it's a presentation, something has to go wrong. So anyways, that's a strong, if anyone was wondering what happened there. But essentially what happens is a user interacts with an element. Let's say they notice that the vary is bold and they want to select the text and make it not bold anymore. They'll update, and then you have an event listener that's listening to the DOM, and it's constantly, monitoring and listening to any kind of keystrokes, user actions that are happening. And then once you get that trigger, the model actually gets updated. And then it probably sets the bold to false, and then it updates the view, which then updates the DOM. The final step with this DOM kind of update, and the important thing to know is that it doesn't re-render the entire DOM. It actually re-renders specific parts of the DOM to make it more efficient, because you don't need to update. If you're only updating the word vary, you don't need to update all of the other things that you have on your view. So that is the sort of separation between the model, view, and the DOM, and how the data flows in CKEditor. So I hope that gave you like a quick kind of overview on what is behind the scenes. And let's kind of head back to what I was talking about with plugin implementation and logic, right? As I said, there's an editing layer and there's a UI layer. And this part, which is the editing part, so we talked about how the UI works. And let's talk about how the editing works. This part is what happens behind the scenes with the UI elements, right? So it includes everything from processing text, transformation, managing the data model, and even implementing core functionalities like bold. So what is plugin editing? It basically contains of 3 main things and then a few other things. But the 3 main things that you need to know about plugin editing is the schema definition, converters, and commands. And these sort of elements, parts of the plugin, work pretty much in conjunction with features such as keystrokes, observers, to enhance your editing capabilities. So here you see my block element, which is allowed in a root element and in the section, and it's allowed in the section element, right? And what you can see is that we also have allow attributes, which is another part of the schema definition, and you can allow text alignment attributes for my block. So that's how you're defining my block when you are going into this application. Then you have another way to do a schema definition, which is extending. So let's say you want to extend text. You have a text and you want to add highlighting to it and allow the attribute of my highlight. Then you actually extend the capability and you would do that. That's kind of how schema definition B is looking. And it's basically just enhancing the text node. So yeah, this I think is pretty crucial because you have a way to sort of define a new element as well as extend an existing one. Now, this means that you can, of course, take an existing element and extend it as a plugin and work with it, or you can use something that is brand new. Now, the converters. So once we have defined what the schema is, we go to the converter. And the converter actually is really interesting because it's a sort of bi-directional flow, right? It's a model to view and view to a model flow. So in the model to view flow, it tells the editor how the model structure should be converted to the view and view back to the model. So the model is actually converted, it's actually converted to 2 separate views. One is for the editing view and one is for the generation of data within your instance. So that's the HTML for instance that you save into your database. And the view actually has to be generally converted to the model. And in that, you're basically loading data to your editor. And if you load HTML and when you're pasting it, that's kind of what's happening within the view to data model. So the view is really designed for usability. It allows users to see and modify content as it will appear in your final output. Now, the commands. Finally, let's talk about commands. So if the user is meant to interact with your feature, then usually you have to implement the command as well. So sometimes not everything has to have a command, but usually in most cases, if your user is interacting with it, so let's say you have something like highlight or bold. This GIF is showing a highlight, but if you have something like highlight or bold, then the implementation of the command is really important. There's an action and a state to a command. The action is, applying the bold itself, and the state is identifying if the selected text is already bold or not, or if it's already highlighted or not. So that's kind of an example of what a command could look like. So here is an example of what it would look like to code something like a plugin. I'm always a little afraid of live demos in a very short presentation. So since I had 25 minutes, you can quickly take a look at the code. Starting at line 6 is what is probably really important. You configure your model to have, let's say, like a highlight. So you're creating a highlight plugin, and it's actually extending the existing text schema definition. As you can see, we're allowing the attribute highlight, and then we're basically saying, hey, if the text is highlighted, then change the background color to that specific color. Pretty simple, and it kind of combines what we learned, which is basically you define the schema definition, extend it on a specific text, and then you configure it. You work between the model and view. The view controls how it's going to appear on your editor, and then you kind of add it to your editor itself. So it's a pretty straightforward, and I know I talked a lot for probably 25 lines of code, but I hope it kind of offers you insight on how this kind of plugin works behind the scenes. Now, I have a few minutes, so how many of you have heard of CKBox? Oh, nice. Well, PK, of course, you have. So CKBox is a, let me say, robust, I would say, cloud asset management solution. And it provides flexibility in both to store, manage, access, or even optimize your digital assets. So for example, this screenshot, if you remember that image on the top right corner, left corner for you guys, it's the Iceland image. And you can basically upload your assets into your editor, and it stores them, and it's a great way to kind of plug it in. And actually, the really cool thing is not the fact that CKBox itself is available, but it's also the fact that it plays really nicely, I think, with CKEditor 5, because it adds some really sweet media embeddings that you can do with the editor that are generally not possible. So when you hook it up with CKEditor 5, it becomes the ultimate hub for all of your media content. And I have a lot of stickers up here for CKBox, so please feel free to come up and grab them. And I think I'll look really good if I give them away. So that would also be really nice. And what's new about this update, CKBox has been around for a little bit, is that it comes with, I believe, 8 new webhook integrations. So you can link up CKBox with other online systems, and then basically have them chat and share data like their old pals. And this feature has actually been in high demand, and so we're really stoked to finally roll it out. With these new integrations, CKBox users can just seamlessly connect content with their collaboration tools and even content supply chains if you have that. So definitely check it out. Come up here, grab some stickers, ask me questions, and come to our booth and ask us questions more about CKBox. Once again, why are we here at DevWorld and what are we doing? We're here at DevWorld to tell you more about CKEditor, and if you've been a power user, we'd love to learn how you're using our applications. We have a raffle at 3 p.m. for the Lego typewriter, so definitely come and check us out at booth D1 before then, and we can scan your badge. I think we'll be scanning badges probably until 1:30. So definitely head over there after the talk. We also have some swag, and we would love to learn from you on how you've used CKEditor or how you would like to use CKEditor, or if there's anything you would like to see in terms of functionality. We also have a Discord channel that we launched. We'd really love to hear from the community and give our feedback to our product teams. We have a Luma events page, so we will be hosting events to talk a little bit more about the details of CKEditor, maybe even do a webinar on plugin development. And then, of course, we have a new Dev2 blog that we released. So if you want to start writing for CKEditor and you want to share your projects, we'd love to hear from you. And reach out to me. I don't think we have time for questions, but reach out to me on all of these platforms. Happy to connect you with the team. Again, my name is Sugosh, and it was really wonderful to have you all here. Thank you.